Yeah, I started this prematurely. Okay, so this is a training that I gave in September of 2017 at the, why is that not working? There we go. At the American Association of Christian Counselors, and the title of the conference was Break Every Chain, so I called this talk Breaking the Chains of Anger in Marriage. And we had about 400 in attendance, had a really, really good turnout, and got very good feedback on that. So by way of introduction, for those of you that may be watching this in YouTube, I've been a preacher's kid all my life, married for 40 years, been a clinical psychologist, and in 1994 began establishing my own entities. And so Eden Counseling and Consulting has been in existence since 1995. And we have just signed up in December our 100,000th patient. So we're really pleased that we've been able to serve our community in that fashion. Then Eden Leaders Institute I started and have been doing coaching and consulting and training, and I'm referencing that here in the beginning to make everyone aware of that. My first book, Win Every Argument, Win Every Heart, contains most of the elements of this presentation. I've written it predominantly for leaders, but the communication, the conflict management, the confrontational chapters are based in the work that I'm presenting to you today. The same acronyms and exercises are in that. So there's Vivian is online, and if others join us online when we're live, you can use the chat feature to ask questions. I'll try to pay attention to that as we go. And the goals of training are to increase or validate skills. We're going to talk particularly about working with personality disorders, which is challenging for many therapists, and how to intervene to reduce anger and conflict and increase, positive interactions. So as we proceed through this, Galatians 5 describes that the acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy. And so here he's describing the crux of human behavior. We behave badly when it's just us, working out our own relationships, responses, functioning in his metaphor of the flesh, which would be what we've known, what comes naturally. And so people have to have help not responding in that way. Drunkenness, orgies, and the like, I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit, which refers to the human being who's in sync with God, is love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that is who we are. That is our identity in Christ. Not the flesh-driven, but rather the capacity to function in the Spirit. So long ago and far away, there was a couple who were caught up in the acts of the flesh. And I actually use this story frequently when I'm doing marriage counseling. It's fairly dramatic, and it does a good job of illustrating how behavior can change fairly quickly. Behavior can change quickly. It takes a while to change attitudes and feelings about relationships. So I'm going to show you the anger expression scale that I use and how to use timeout to reduce anger. And we're going to work through some of these constructs and principles as we present today. When this couple first called me, and they were leaders in the community, and so I often end up, kind of making some introductory phone calls, phone conversations with people who are exploring getting some help. So that's not unusual. What was unusual was they asked me over and over who would know about us, who would be aware that we're coming, who would know the contents of our conversation. So confidentiality was very important, as it is in any counseling context. But there was really something different about the way they were asking that. And then when I met with them in the office, same thing. Who's going to know about this? And then you'll see in a minute why that was the case. But confidentiality is very important. And in any safe conversation, I've contrived the simple acronym CLAPS. We have to have confidentiality. Who will know what I'm sharing with you? How will it be used? Gossip is extremely bad. It's destructive. And so we inherently need to, as counselors, or if you're watching and you're a minister or other kind of role, we have to create a confidential context. And then we have to listen really, really well. Everyone needs to be heard. One of the big issues in relationships is people stop really listening to each other. And so the modeling of the therapist and how to really listen to the nuance, to the heart, to messages that are not coming out directly, and training our couples to do this is very, very important. Acceptance. We use the language as counselors that is free of judgment. Even when people are telling us terrible things, we don't condemn or criticize. We really work to understand, and we're modeling for them the same thing. Body language, tone of voice, timing. I tell people when people are angry, their speech is getting faster and louder, and the pitch is getting higher. And so we need to train ourselves, and we can, therapists do this, to go lower and slower. We lower the pitch, we lower the pace, and we slow down the rate of speech, and we create a calming presence. That's what therapists do. Praise sandwich is in a criticism, in a confrontation, you start with the positive, then you add the negative, and then you follow with the positive. This simple device, which many of you have heard even this simple phrase, praise sandwich, has to be authentic, or else it appears manipulative. So the language used has to be genuine, that the therapist's heart has to be really evident in the caring that is present for this to be effective, so that people can see that they too can do this in authentic ways. And then skill selection has to do with listening skills, which we'll cover in a minute. I have an acronym EVE, Echo, Validate, Empathize. And you use a factual echoing in a calm, factual conversation, but you lead with empathy when there is emotion expressed. And we'll elaborate on why that is. So the simple acronym CLAPS is in my book, and we'll be referring to various aspects of this as we move through. So in a first session of any marriage therapy, particularly marriage therapy that has to do with, you're dealing with highly conflicted couples, the therapist has to be directive. This is not a context in which one can be passive listening, sort of just allowing things to unfold. Many patients are lost because in the first session, they don't get a real sense of value. I believe it's imperative in a competitive market that a therapist sells, not intentionally, but really presents something of great value, which helps guide the patient into a meaningful relationship and a desire and motivation to change and work. And so the very beginning of particularly when you're dealing with conflicted couples, how you start the session is very, very important. And so we were trying to create this safe environment. We're going to model appropriate behavior. You have to actually control communication. You can't just let them tell stories, and you have to pay close attention to body language. One party's often speaking, ignoring the body language of the other person's getting angry or tuning out, and then you have to intervene. You can't let long periods of time go by with old communication patterns, old conflict that they can do at home by themselves. They don't want to pay you extravagant amounts of money to just experience what they can experience at home. So this is very, very important. We limit romance and we limit anger expression, and we promote positive romantic interaction from the first session. And you'll see how that's real critical as we get back to the case study we were working on here. So one of the first things I do, I'm going to interview some constructs, then we'll illustrate them. One of the first things I do after an introduction, why are you here? How are you feeling about doing this? What's your history of counseling? Is a very simple marriage assessment device in which we use a 5-point rating scale and simply present one item at a time, 5 being, excellent, really impacting positively our relationship, 1 being, this is a real weakness, it's harming our relationship directly. And scaling is used in many contexts. I use it a lot in dealing with couples. It provides a simple focus, an ability to just engage. Each party can engage. It minimizes conflict because I'm actually controlling all of the conversation because I'm letting them respond. I'm asking for clarity. I'm moving on to the next piece. But it allows people to speak their mind with very little conflict between the two of them, and I get useful information. So the elements of this are, here's the way I do it. I'll say the first thing I want to ask you about is faith. And then I give examples. 5 is we have faith, we have values. And even if I'm working with a couple that doesn't have a faith base, I will talk about we have values that guide us, principles. by which we make decisions, by which we determine right and wrong. And so a 5 would be, yes, we have common values and or faith, and it enhances our relationship. A 1 would be, no, we really don't believe that we have these elements in our life, or we are in conflict over them. And so I just have them state a 1 and a 5, and I'm using a whiteboard. And so I write faith, and I have his initial and her initial, and I just write the number there. I try to keep it brief because I want to get through this. I want to get them a feel for how they can have conversation that flows without argument, without rebuttal. And so if there's any rebuttal, I'll just remind them, each one of you is welcome to express your opinion on this. And we're going to go through this, and then maybe later we'll talk about it. So I'm postponing conflicted conversation, usually throughout until another session, honestly. And I'm just gathering information. And most people enter into this willingly, and it's not hard for them to do. So leisure time, a 5 is we have time that we can be together, and we enjoy that time. There are things we like to do. This taps on the friendship of a relationship. We like being together. We enjoy spending time with each other. And so a 5 would be that. A 1 would be, no, we're too busy. We don't have time. So a 1 is either no time to interact due to finances, due to demands of life, health issues perhaps, child rearing complications, or we have lost that, or we never had it. We just have never really been friends. So a 5 is we do have this. We love getting together. We enjoy this, this, and this. A 1 would be no, we are disconnected in terms of pleasurable leisure activities. Finances, a 5 would be we have enough. We are not in a state of poverty, and we're in relative agreement as to what to spend, how to save, how to set goals. So the savers and the spenders have worked it out. They're getting along well enough with each other, and so our financial status enhances our relationship. Contrasted to a 1, that would be we don't have enough. Poverty is an automatic 1. Poverty is a terrible thing, to really not have enough food, not have enough shelter, not have enough resources to live basic lives, not having access to education, not having access to medical care. Poverty is a terrible thing, and it's always destructive. Or we're just in great conflict. You'll see that many of the 1s may pertain to how they're managing problems around these issues. And so conflict, disagreement is a 1 in finances. Parenting, we're happy with what we're producing here. We think we're doing pretty well. Our kids, at whatever age they are, seem to be doing all right. And the process we have been in relative harmonious agreement with. We understand, we have a method of parenting, principles we've applied, and we're pretty happy with how that goes. So having children has enhanced our relationship versus a 1 where things just have not gone well. I've had parents grievously state, I never would have had kids if I had known it would have been this bad. Or the conflict between the couple is huge regarding parenting. One sees a child as bad, the other is sick, a child who's struggling. They have great conflict over what to do, punish, get help. And so 5 is we're enhanced by our parenting, and 1 is it's destroying our marriage. And often this is a significant conflict over what to do with adult children who are still dependent. Great conflicts occur in midlife and older marriages around this theme. 5 is friends and family. And so 5 is we have people that love us, and we love them. We are part of a community that has value and holds us accountable and enriches our life, and we have fun with. It's a community of love and general acceptance and peace. That would be a 5. A 1 would be we are in isolation, and this is a significant detriment to marriage counseling. The research in marriage counseling is abysmal. 20% of couples who enter into, if you look at the meta-analysis, 20% of couples who enter into marriage counseling have significant gain. But I'm convinced the issue is this piece right here. If they're functioning in isolation, all they have to work with are the storylines that they have lived, and looking forward, that's all they have. They don't have other options to think about, other examples, models, mentors to live. So a 1 in friends and family is a significant detriment to the success of your marriage counseling. And we're blessed at Eden. I see a 90% improvement rate. And that's because we tend to see couples who are connected. They're engaged in a church. They do have family nearby. And it's a huge gain. And for those couples that do not have this, I try to plug them in as quickly as possible into a community, if they're willing to enter into a community where they can begin building relationship. It became clear to me decades ago that the couples that make it are not isolated. The couples that make it have loving relationships that hold them accountable, help them realize, partner along. And I love it, particularly if we're dealing with something like adultery. which is a 90% probability of divorce. If there's a mentor couple who's worked it through so that they're able to authentically say, when it's really hard, yes, it's really hard, but keep going. You can make it. That kind of hope is invaluable in marriage counseling. Communication. 5, we communicate often, and we work to maintain respect in our communication. We seek understanding. We try to move quickly from conflict to communication. And so our volume, quality, and style of communication is relationship enhancing. A 1 would be we are not communicating. That would be an automatic 1. And normally a 1 also relates to conflict. Our communication is much more too often conflicted, too intensely conflicted. So that is often a variable there. The sexual relationship. A 5 is we enjoy our sexuality. We've worked out individual preferences. Not everybody gets everything they want, but the frequency, the meaningfulness, the fun, the playfulness of our sexual relationship greatly enhances our relationship. That would be a 5. A 1 would be just a second. Could you just text her that I'm training right now? Sorry about that interruption. A 1 would be we are abstaining from sex. An asexual relationship is considered once a month of sexual contact, not having enough impact. So once a month or less of any kind of sexual interaction is considered an asexual or non-sexual relationship, not bringing any value to the relationship. A 1 also may imply hurts and damage out of some kind of sexual history or infidelity or something like that. So you have 5 is we're enjoying, it's enhancing, and 1 is it's destructive. 9, perceptions of each other's personalities. This is getting a little complex. I often use personality measures. My latest joy is the Pro-D comprehensive assessment system, which I have couples take, goes in great depth of personality. But this simple scaling is a 5 is I like my spouse. I understand his or her strengths and weaknesses. We work around that. Basically, I see my spouse as a good person that I want to spend time with, I want to live with. So it's just a simple measure of overall habits, style, and behaviors. A 1 would be usually the result of some specific, greatly negative thing: addiction, abuse, deception, adultery. A 1, no, I am unhappy, I feel unsafe, I'm doubting whether I want to continue with this person. That would be a 1 under perception of each other's personalities and behaviors. Marital expectations, another more vague one. I explain it this way. A 5 would be we watch Oprah, we watch Dr. Phil, we read books. After X number of years in marriage, we kind of get it. We know what's going on with wealth and social and parenting. It kind of fits for us. That would be a 5. High level of understanding and awareness. A 1 would be, I'm constantly just shocked at where we're at. I don't get it. I don't know how we got here. I don't know what to expect as we move forward, given our position. So the marital expectation that is just foggy and vague is usually the 1. Or I'm just expecting horrible things to happen would be a 1. So even when I think about what to expect in my marriage, it has either a positive effect or a negative effect. And the research argues that people who think positively about their spouse more than negative has a huge impact on how they behave, how they receive praise and criticism from the spouse. So what we expect has a lot to do with how we perceive and how we respond. So back to case number 1. We did what I just shared with you. We did the 1 to 5 rating scale, and we got some growth areas in the areas of 1s and 2s. By the way, some couples have all 1s and 2s. And my response always is, I couldn't be more delighted. I can do no wrong here. You guys, everything's a wreck. And so anything we do that's good will be positive. And so it's going to be a joy to work with you because I know I'm going to see great progress. So I always respond in the first session, you have to present hope where there is hopelessness. It has to be authentic. It has to be believable. But it's very, very, very important because they are ashamed of themselves. They are appalled at their marriage. And so I have to receive them with a positive expectancy. I know if we do the work, things will get better. And that's out of my own authentic life experience that I can make those kind of statements. So they were low on conflict management, communication, perceptions of each other's personalities. They didn't like each other anymore. And their sexual relationship was predominantly a symptom of the intense conflict that they had been experiencing. So that was what came out as a weak area. I went backwards. Sorry about that, folks. So anytime I get conflict as one of the weak areas, which is probably 80% of the time when I'm working with couples, and probably 10% of the ones that didn't rank it as an issue weren't really, they're kind of in denial. We always, 99% of the time, I'm presenting the anger expression skill, how to pay attention to our anger, how to limit our anger expression early in the process. This is key to helping people get started and move forward constructively. And so this couple that I'm talking to you about, I went through this device next, and it's a simple 10-point scale. It will take 2 slides, and I introduce it just like this. I'm often writing this on my whiteboard, so they're watching me create line by line. So my 10-point scale, 10 is murder, it is death. 9 is physical wounding, no matter how small, a scratch, a bruise, or more dramatic physical wounding, or what I call major property damage, punching a hole in the wall, tearing a door off of its hinges. One of the things that a 9 does is it creates a reminder of the aggression, whether it's physical on the body or physical in the environment. So one is thinking about it longer. It prolongs the impact of the violence if there is evidence, physical evidence of that violence. And so that's a 9. 8 is physical contact without wounding, or what I call minor property damage. If I was holding an object in my hand and in anger threw it to the floor, no great harm is done if it's, say, a pen or a trivial item. But the elevation of fear and aggression is highly heightened greatly by any kind of physical expression. So 8 is physical contact or minor property damage without wounding. 7 is contempt, which can include shrieking, cursing, name-calling, or silent expressions, rolling one's eyes, shrugging one's shoulders with a smirk on one's face as if to be dismissive. And that's what contempt is. I'm dismissing you. You're beneath me. You're not worth my time and attention. It's very, very destructive. So that's a 7. But honestly, I'll tell people, in an expressive marriage, there will be 7s. And I often am transparent with marriage counseling, much more than individual, telling stories, giving vignettes. And so I will share, my wife and I are very expressive, and we're not yellers and screamers. That's really, really rare. So you hardly ever see a 6, which we'll get to in a minute. But because we're expressive, because we're facile with words, there will be expressions of contempt or perceptions of contempt fairly regularly. And the key here is how to recover from them and the ratio of positive to negative, which we'll get in a minute. But I just let people know so that they're willing to confess. You know, even in my marriage, there are 7s that are sprinkled through the verbal landscape. And so a 6 is just too intense. It's just too loud. And I share with people, and this is individually perceived. And again, transparency. My best friends are expressive people. They will shout at each other, but they think nothing of it. Whereas when that occurs in my household, that's a big deal. So what they call a 6 is way more intense than what I would call a 6. But they're also very expressive with joy, positive, and love expression. They're just very expressive. They're, I had a former partner that was Mediterranean in ethnicity. And so he was all hands and words and gestures, whereas I'm more Northern European. And these ethnicities do have traits that come down, either culturally or genetically or something. So we are different, and we need to accept those differences. And so whichever couple calls it the higher number, that's the one you respond to. You don't argue over whether it's a 6 or a 5 or a 4. But we allow the person that rates it highest, that is the level that's being pronounced in the moment. A 5 is an in-between place. And when I'm demonstrating this, I'll stand up and I'll go to the edge of a carpet that's in my office. And I'll walk to the edge. It's as if you're walking to the edge of a tall building or the Grand Canyon. You're peeking over the edge. And the natural inclination is to what? And they'll all say, step back. Absolutely. But do you know that facing the danger of negative, hurtful conversation, people leap forward. They don't step back. So there's a moment in time where you are aware of what you're feeling. It's rising up, and you can choose to step back or move forward. And so what we're going to be advocating is step back rather than move forward. But people plunge themselves into great chaos. And I explain, I usually draw a picture of a brain at this point. And I draw the prefrontal lobe, and I say this has to be on, engaged, working, for there to be new information understood, creative problem solving, and self-control. And right at 5 and clearly above 5, it's turning off. And the limbic system, which is the seat of emotion, the seat of defensiveness, the seat of attack, that's taking over. And so we say and do and respond to things with a heightened emotionality that we do not do when we are calm. So they get a little lecture here, a little brain picture. Our goal is to keep everything 5 and below. And below 5, We have a 4, which is emotional expression. And here's the key, but nobody is afraid or nobody feels contempt. And here's where my wife and I and my close friend couple are different. They don't perceive contempt with volume, or even with some things that are said rather harshly, whereas we would see that. So again, 4, 5, and 6 may be differentially defined by a couple's style and background and expectations. But the goal here is nobody's afraid and nobody experiences any contempt. 3 is the true assertive model. It's usually very calm after the fact. An example might be, say, I'm on the phone with my wife. Her voice stops. I later tell her, I was really angry when you hung up on me because what I was saying I thought was important. It felt like it was contemptuous. So I'm using non-judgmental, very descriptive language as I describe what happened. And then my wife may say, well, I'm sorry, my phone battery died at that point. I apologize. Well, that would alter the whole thing. But if I had approached her yelling and screaming, I would have got yelling and screaming back. So the way an assertive expression is calm, factual, non-judgmental, and it opens the door to dialogue. That's a big, important piece here. So 2 is just the most minor, excuse me, circumstances, just the brief passing of frustration on one's face, and 1, no expression at all. So I needed nothing to death. Those are my 10 points. And so what we do with them, after we've gone through this and explained it, I ask, how intense has it ever been? This couple endorsed a 9. How often does this happen? This couple endorsed a frequency that was alarming and a frequency of 8 that was alarming. And we proceed down the scale, and it often goes from the highest, 8 or 9, if that's the case, to less frequent, with the exception of maybe 7 or 6, more frequent. And so you usually descend like that with 6 and 7 more frequent, and then on down into 4, 3, and 2. And sometimes people will say, we never do 3 and 4. It's always 6 and 7, when we're doing this. So everybody that I've worked with, except for one family in the history of my whole life, has agreed that they want to draw a line at 5 and below. Sometimes a kid will say, I want to yell, but adults, no. There was one family I worked with, and this stands out in memory because it's such an unusual situation. The adult son, who had been dismissed from the home because of a history of violence, was wanting to come back and reside with his parents. So a 22, 23-year-old adult male who'd lived out of his home for several years. And so who came to the session were the parents, the adult son, his girlfriend, with whom he had a very close relationship, and his 2 sisters who were still minors. And so at this point of the conversation, I put my scale up, and I have everybody, when it's a family, everybody gets a vote. And so I'm writing various numbers, and I saw that there had been a history of 9. It hadn't happened in a long time, positive kinds of things. But when I asked, where do you think we should draw the line, he said 9, which surprised me. I thought maybe he wasn't understanding this whole exercise. So I said, now 9 is where we are able to harm people. He said, absolutely, you have to be able to hurt people. And so at that point, I ended the session with them. The parents stayed. I said, I'm going to excuse. Okay, I get it. I excused the children, and I said to the parents, who I saw in their eyes the same fogginess, I don't know what to do, that they've had for years while raising their children. And so I very directively said, he may not come into the home to reside. You have to limit your daughter's exposure to him, or they will experience harm when he is unhappy. He's declaring that violence is one of his primary tools for getting what he wants. They came out of their fog, they set the limits, and they kept everybody safe. That's a very unusual response to this process. So what do we do with this now? They agree to limit expression. They agree to call a timeout. Whoever calls it the highest, if it's a 6 or above, we're going to stop what we're doing immediately. And we are going to go to neutral territory for a minimum of 20 minutes. And then I teach about taking a timeout, how you think positive things, you put yourself in a peaceful place. And I use examples for me. If my wife and I are really, we're having a rough time, probably it's because we're both stressed from other things as well, and we need to do some stress management, personal stress management before coming together. I happen to like physical activity, and so I tell people I live around there's a little 1.3 mile loop that I can run in a short period of time, and I am always refreshed, always revived, always able to engage after that brief break. So I talk to them, it's really important what you think, because you can step away from a situation and I'll show you a graph in a little bit, and just remain angry, come back together angry, keep ongoing conflict up for years. I worked with a couple that had not slept in the same bedroom for 19 years, had an ongoing problem that they could not resolve for 19 years. And after a while in therapy, they were able to cohabitate again in the same space using these principles that I'm teaching here. I encourage them to use numbers to communicate. This is a 6. It gets them out of, you did this, stop that, the old triggers that would start an argument. This is a 6, I need to take a timeout. This feels like a 7. I think I've just expressed a 7, I need a timeout. It only takes one person to call a timeout if the other one will comply and accept it. So it empowers everybody, including children when I'm working with families, to call a timeout when things are too intense. Excuse me. I have ongoing allergies and reactions to dry air. We're recording this after a snowstorm, and so the air is kind of dry, and I cough a little bit. So landmines I described then. Landmines are best avoided. Landmines are things that blow up, body parts fly everywhere, and it's very difficult to recover from. Everybody's got them. Sometimes they're in the bedroom, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the hallways, okay, someone needs to mute their microphone, please. We're getting some feedback. So if you'll mute your microphone, that would be helpful. Thank you. Oh, by the way, for those of you that are listening in, there's a chat bar that I can get into. It'll sort of mess up the screen while we do this. But if you want to chat and you're listening online right now, you can do it in that fashion, and I will try to pay attention and see if chats come up and respond to that in that fashion. So feel free to do that while we're doing this live presentation. And I guess I apologize. I have to maneuver this to get it to change slides. So there we go. So they had their 8 and 9. Frequency was 8, was daily for a year. Daily physical violence. Now this couple was a leadership couple, known in the community, easily identifiable, hence all that confidentiality business. So they were ashamed, and they should be. They were deeply ashamed of the aggression that had taken place. They had put each other in the hospital during this period of time. So this is a very intense, very destructive, however, not an abusive relationship. Abuse is an imbalance of power. So if someone can't fight back, that's abuse. Now, that one might claim the other is abusing me, but if two people have the equal capacity to put the other in the hospital and are willing to engage in that kind of warfare, it's not abuse, it is a fight. It is a fight. We'll talk about abusive couples before we're done, which is a different kind of dynamic. But sometimes people have the capacity to fight, and they do. They both have the capacity then to refrain from fighting, which is different than abuse. You can't make someone not be abusive. They have to choose to not be abusive. You can make someone stop fighting. You can call the police. You can leave the premises. I had a couple that I worked with a number of years ago. In the first session, only the man came. 6'4", probably 350 pounds, giant of a man. And I said, what brings you in? He talked about he and his wife having constant conflict, did the anger expression scale, way too much fighting, though no injuries. He says, actually, I don't fight her. She attacks me. And so I talked about timeout, and I said, you'll need to do this on your own. She's not here, but you cannot engage in this way. You're putting yourself at great risk, your family at great risk. And so he said, I can't. She'll just go nuts. She has this abandonment thing. If I leave, she'll just go crazy. I said, well, you'll have to decide what your priorities are. You may have to let her suffer a bit. And so he said he'd try. The next scheduled meeting, she comes in. She's a diminutive 5'2" individual, married to this bear of a man. And she said, I get it. I can't have him leave. I have abandonment issues. I will take timeouts. I will leave if need be. And thus began the beginning. They both then came. We worked on their marriage and improved greatly. One individual can make a change if it is non-abusive, or if they have the power. He was a big guy. He could walk away. So one individual can influence the conflict in a marriage as long as it's not abusive. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So I've already kind of talked about this. The brain function, prefrontal lobe has to be on. I guess when I gave this talk, I tucked it in here initially. I talked about landmines already, and I say that here in the beginning, you have these hot, issues that you feel you must talk about. And here's where I talk about the sequence of the therapy. We start by reducing conflict, increasing positive interaction. We'll get to that in a minute. Then I teach you how to problem solve. And then once I know you can communicate, once I see that you can manage your emotions, then we get into landmines. But it's after I know that you can handle it. I do not want body parts flying all around my office, although I'm likely to get a glimpse of these as they appear in conversation, and I will do my best to help limit it in here. And I really want you to go into the minefield and put a flag on each mine. That's what you do with a minefield. You put a flag and you stay away. We're not going to talk about that unless we're with a therapist. We're not going to deal with that, if at all possible. And then you find an expert to help you dismantle the mines. And the reality is, in a minefield, not all mines get dismantled. And so we have to be on guard for the entirety of our relationship, not to fall back into habits where we're blowing up landmines and harming each other. I'm going to show you a graph in a minute, and it illustrates the march of death. It is a graph of rapid escalation of anger, continued intensity, failure to calm down, and this is out of Gottman's work. Those of you that have read his work, John Gottman and his wife, they were able to predict with 20-minute interviews, something like 80% accuracy, who would get divorced in the next 2 years based on how they managed conflict. So this is the march of death. This is my anger scale to the left. Rapid escalation very quickly. And the stereotype they used to say from research was the male would perceive himself as criticized, get explosively angry. She would join him. They would just fight. The break in the action here is represented by a passive-aggressive withdrawal, stomping off angrily, but they, in their mind and in their heart, remain anger. So when they come right back together, they're right where they were. And this predicts the death of a relationship when it is this kind of conflict. Everybody's dream, you're going to see a graph of a gentle startup. A gentle startup is, I would say to my wife, Becky, there's some things we need to talk about. Do you have a few minutes? You just set the stage. She can decide whether she's able to engage, and we go on. We limit the conflict to a 4. There's a point of resolution, and then there's a kiss and make up. So that it looks like this: a gentle startup, not a rapid escalation, a gentle startup. And then we talk, and we stay at a 4 or below. We reach some kind of resolution where the slope starts to go down, or we decide we need more information, we need research. But then we calm down at the very end. There's a kiss and make up moment, perhaps literally kiss and make up. We don't want our relationship as a married couple to be defined by conflicts. And so just like when you discipline a child, you take that child, you hug the child, you tell him or her that you love them. You don't want your relationship with your children to be defined by misbehavior and punishment. And so we work hard to keep positive interactions. Now, our home has some of those moments. It has a ton of these moments in which we exceed a 5 and go into 6 and 7. Call a timeout because we have, allow things to calm down, and then carry on from there. Again, reaching a point of constructive resolution or stopping, kiss and make up. So this shows we tried a gentle startup, but we burst through and we got contemptuous or intense. We call a timeout. And Becky and I have been doing this for a number of years. We don't always call a timeout. Sometimes we just stop and look at each other and just back up a few paces and just let things calm down a little bit. We've been practicing this for decades. And we still have to exercise it. That's another important, transparent point. I'm who I am, and I have to work in certain contexts at being patient and kind and slow to speak. But here's a graph of that. And this is fine too, not a problem at all. You're all familiar with the simple definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. It is astounding, those of you that do marital work, how often people return. There's a proverb that says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to its folly. We just do it. And so the counselor joining the relationship has the opportunity to significantly teach. This is a very didactic approach, and model. My behavior is very, very important, and to train and motivate people to try something different. So their first homework assignment and teaching is about conflict management. You must take timeouts. And oh, by the way, this is very important. I tell them you will not be perfect. This is new. You will make mistakes. That's okay. You'll learn from them. You'll figure out after the fact, oh, we should have taken a timeout. That's okay. Don't be discouraged. Everybody has to. I really emphasize the discipline and the work of creating a better relationship. I really try to get rid of the myth of magic and romance, and nobody should have to have these kind of problems and all that. It's hard work, but it's worth it. So part of the work is positive interaction. We want, and I'll often draw this on the whiteboard, 20 times more positive than negative interaction. The anger expression scale, limiting your anger, will help reduce the negativity, but we want to boost the positive, and you can do this. This is true. Everybody can do this if they choose to. So I take them through a simple exercise, a blank. I say, when you go home, take a blank piece of paper, and I have a handout for everything I do, so they can walk out with, so they remember. But a blank piece of paper, I loved and cared about when you, and 12 specific, concrete, positive things that someone can do that helps them feel loved. This comes from work that was out of the late 60s, actually. Sagan's book on marriage contracts. So they create this list, and then what we do, and when in the next session we go over the list, and I just listen, I help them edit it. And before we start, they must be positive. Therefore, I feel loved and cared about when you don't nag me. That's a different exercise. That isn't on this. These are traditional, hugs and kisses and gifts and doing nice things and saying hello and being pleasant. These are the things that make up romance in the beginning, when you chose to be with each other. So the homework for session 1, limit expression through using the anger expression scale and taking time out, agree to avoid landmines, create a romance builder list, and I say you can share it as long as it doesn't lead to negativity. If you start getting conflicted, hold off. Session 2, we'll go over the romance list and get that going. Take personal responsibility. This is a discipline thing. Everybody's responsible for their own behavior. You didn't make me yell at you. You didn't make me feel whatever. And so we're emphasizing this. Take responsibility to speak the truth, to listen to each other, and to pledge to begin a different lifestyle as they leave my office. So I did all of that with my case study couple, and they were with me. They were skeptical about could they refrain from a physical aggression. And so I said to them, I don't care if you barely speak to each other this week. If you can manage self-control, timeouts, and refrain, and you come back and you have diminished the frequency of physical conflict, I'm calling it a win. And that's exactly what happened. They returned the second session, and I said, so how we took the anger management scale out, anger expression scale out, and there were no 8s, no 9s. I said, congratulations. And he said, sort of tongue-in-cheek, yeah, we hardly spoke to each other. I said, that's awesome. You did exactly what you need to do. We now have stopped the violence and the repeating destructiveness that you all were doing to each other. And that couple, being fairly high-functioning in most areas of their life, having gotten off, intentionally gotten off of this daily ritual of aggression and harm, to my knowledge, never again experienced an 8 or a 9. Now, they had other problems they had to work with that were severe, but the anger stops, or at least the aggression stops here. Not the anger itself, but the aggressive expression stops here. And that has been my experience with almost all of my couples. Abusive couples are a little different. In fact, most people would say you can't do marriage counseling with abusive couples. But my experience has been, depending on the imbalance of power, I'm working with couples now who one would say there's an clear abusive element to one of the individuals, but the imbalance isn't that a person can't take a timeout, can't get away, and so I'm experiencing some success with low-level abusive couples, but that's rare, honestly. Most of the time, an abusive individual is so distorted in their perception of self and other that they justify and see no motivation for change. And that's so usually separation is absolutely necessary with most abused couples. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Those of you that are in counseling, this applies to you. Whatever your role, pastors, if you are a peacemaker, you will be called a child of God. So if you have questions, don't call that number. That I should have changed these slides. If you have questions, you'll have to email us if you're watching this on YouTube. Go to our website, EdenCounseling.com, ask a question. Go to Facebook, Eden Counseling has a Facebook, and ask questions. If you're live right now, you just type in a chat, and we will proceed like this. So why am I looking at this? 5 principles. It's been a while since I gave this talk. So, successful marriage counseling. This is a meta-analysis by Lisa Benson et al. If you change the conceptualization of the relationship, this is the couple. The couple changes how they think about it. They modify the dysfunctional behavior. They decrease emotional avoidance. So timeout is brief. It's not, you want people to come together. They improve communication. They promote mutual strengths. These are the 5 principles that their meta-analysis of research says must occur. And when it does, you have marital change. So those are useful things to be looking at in terms of your own cases, your own roles. Are we strategically working in these directions? And you'll see that what I'm teaching strategically approaches, gives you a method to help them think differently about each other, to clearly, we're talking today specifically about the angry behavior, but also the positive behavior, which starts moving them together, increasing communication. And in the individual, it's important, I didn't mention this in the beginning of this particular talk, but your individual assessment of each of the parties is very, very important. I like to use scales like the MMPI, the MCMI. There are APA scales. American Psychological Association has free scales you can download from their website and employ if you don't want to spend money on devices or if you're not a psychologist. And so, but in interview fashion, if possible, information from other people, and then I use tests and scales so that I can judge in advance, can they handle this? Do they have enough ego strength, enough stress tolerance, enough vitality to handle the stress of change, which is a big deal. And so we need to know their strengths and we promote their strengths. I have a training called 4-Session Marriage Counseling, and you can go online. If you go to YouTube and look up my name, you'll see this. It's in 4 one-hour segments, and this talk I'm giving today is excerpted from that. And so I want to give you a quick outline of what 4 sessions might look like. There's some caveats here. A lot of change can occur in 4 sessions if they're motivated, if they're not isolated, if there aren't significant life stressors that are drawing time and attention away. The context in which we always see progress is an intensive, which we do. We bring people in for several days, and their 4 sessions of marriage counseling are mass. They're close together. It's a mass training, and the homework is very concrete. So we try to manage all that they do as much as we can manage over a 3 to 5 day period of time. We always see constructive results with this kind of intervention. When it's stretched out over time, most of you would see somebody and see them another week or 2 later. A lot of life happens in between that you don't get to control. And so being very concrete with your homework assignments, encouraging them. Some of you, I have a work email. I might invite certain leadership couples. If you have a comment or a question, email me. I don't mind. It's not a big deal. I can respond to that. They always have my phone number if they have an emergency. Not my personal, but my desk phone. And so there's, they need more support than they think they need. Let me just tell you that, more than you think they need. When one of my own children went through a really, really difficult marital time, I learned firsthand a greater lesson in how much support it takes for people to do well through marriage challenges. So first session or pre-interview, I'm assessing individuals. I have them complete some scales. I'm looking in particular at stress tolerance, individual stress tolerance. And you're looking at health and their experience with therapy, their expectations of therapy, and what kind of supports they have to help them through. I tell everybody, I can't remember if it's in this slideshow, I use Ecclesiastes 4. If a man's working in a field and falls, no one can help him. But if 2 are working and he falls, the other can help him up. They get a better return for their labor. They can fight against a common enemy and keep each other warm at night. A cord of 3 strands, who can break it? 3 strands. 3 strands woven together. The tensile strength is hugely bigger than each single strand. So I ask people, who are your 3 individuals outside of your spouse you can go to anytime? They'll be honest, they'll be non-judgmental, they'll be caring. And if that doesn't exist, that's a goal of therapy, that they will develop relationships that will support them. So second session, we review the homework from the first session. We refine the romance builders, and then they are to put it in a prominent place. The exchange list, put your spouses in a prominent place, agree to do 2 a day for the rest of your life. And when your spouse does a gift, then you say thank you. You say thank you. I also, in that conversation, will look at the concept of love language. Gary Chapman's work, his book. You can, when they write out these things, you can see, are they a words person? Are they a meaningful time person? And I'll comment on that. You really need to give effort in this. And very often people have different love languages. So it has to be an intentional kind of thing. I tell people that in romance, you were unconsciously highly intentional about pleasing the other party. You were selling yourself. You were somebody that you could not ever sustain, your loving, giving, generous self. And that is time limited. And research argues that 18 months is the time limit on being that wonderful, wonderful person until our regular humanity comes out. And then we have to be intentional. That's the word that I use. You have to decide to be that wonderful person that you know you can be, but you have to come up with different motivation, and the distractions of life have to be managed, and your stress has to be managed so you can be that wonderful, loving person. So in the third session, we're doing effective problem solving. I use a brainstorm approach, a simple whiteboard exercise, the problem written in non-judgmental terms, and then you brainstorm with no discussion. You can see elaboration of this in my longer training. Handouts are available on edencounseling.com. And it's always effective. It always is. We brainstorm, and I interrupt if they start talking about it, because I explain, if you start talking about the problems, you will talk about them in the same way you always have. You will regress into negative. So we limit conversation, just throwing out ideas, and then we vote. I've got 12 ideas on the board at least. Good or bad is the vote. Each one declares it good or bad. If it's bad, I erase it. There's no need to discuss things that we will not agree on. And so what we end up with are simply starting points that we agree on. We've sidestepped the argument and the conflict. We then vote as to or declare where we will start, and then we discuss implementation. This takes 20 to 25 minutes, no longer. If it takes longer than 20 minutes, they're engaging in sideways conversations, and it's going like this. And I try to model efficient, peaceful, calm, and there's often humor. In fact, I'll throw in one that's just ridiculous, so it gets voted off the board. And they get a feel for this. It's almost always smiles, no matter what the problem is. They're just kind of smiling. There's humor, and there's hope. There's the expectation. We've done something. The final point that we can start is a doable step. And I tell people, change occurs mostly in small steps. We'd like to see gigantic change, but little steps eventually add up until we look behind and say, oh, we've made great progress. So problem solving is very important. If I can get them to effectively problem solve, I'm eliminating a lot of content from the marital therapy. We don't have to cover it because they're doing better. And so I tell them, I want you to do a brainstorm a week throughout the entire time that you're in marriage counseling. Set aside a half hour, choose an issue that needs resolution, practice, practice, practice. That's how you get good at something. Third session, I review all the homework from before. Are they avoiding landmines? Are they practicing romance? Are they doing brainstorms? Are they being good to each other? And by the third session, they're starting to get it. If they're doing this stuff, they're reporting, things are more peaceful. I'm starting to feel better about my spouse. And again, I elaborate on this in greater detail in longer training, but I just wanted to get you to feel for the flow of this. So in the fourth session, I introduce the method. I call it Search for Safety, and it is the method for dismantling landmines. It's an acronym, and I can't remember if it's in the slideshow. We may run across it as I go forward. Put yourself in a safe place. This is the listener. We have the speaker and the listener. The listener goes to a safe place, responds only with empathy. That's skill selection. There is an affect change. That's the A, by the other party. Once the anger is expressed, I explain it served its purpose if it's been received. If you defend against the anger, it has to hit harder. But it's a matter of communication. If I receive the anger, beneath it is calm or something deeper. And if there's something deeper, we get a reframe. And so I've got many couples that had very meaningful, intimacy-enhancing sessions as we let someone unpack their pain and the other party effectively listens and empathizes. And it runs the course of eventually coming to calm. You get out the pain. And this is another 20, 25-minute exercise. And to the final, they're calm. And then the S is put yourself in a safe place, listen with empathy. Affect changes is the A. R is reframe. You get maybe a little different picture on things historically. Providing comfort, that's the C, and H is help. I have the listener ask, how can I help with this? And get 3 responses. Quick tale about this one. I had a couple years ago in a land far away, and they had significant conflict. And the first time we did this, she was the speaker, he was the listener, and I had trained them to use echoing and validating and empathy, and they got it pretty well. So he listens, and she begins complaining, which is how this starts. You're always late to pick me up. And so when you invite emotional expression, it's really important as a therapist you pay attention to this. Language is exaggerated, overly negative, and you have to train the listener not to take the bait of the inflammatory language, but to listen just for the emotion. You are always late. He could easily counter with, no, I'm not. But he just listened, said, you're really unhappy and frustrated with me. That's the message. Yes, I am. And she went on to talk about how he was always late to pick her up at certain events, particularly church. And she began crying. And she said, my mother was always late. And here's this opportunity for a reframe. So she tells a story about her alcoholic mother frequently neglected her and embarrassed her to no end. School, Girl Scouts, friends' houses. The mother fails to appear, and she has to be taken care of by somebody else or find her own way. A deep-seated wound, so to speak, that this individual carried that was triggered by her husband's tardiness, neglectful behavior, not thinking of her, not valuing her, but at a level she's experiencing at a level that is, pre-adolescent, very, very powerful. So she begins talking like this. He remains with empathy and sees her crying, begins to hear her story, takes her hand very appropriately. She needs some comfort. He can give it. And she talks about how she must have been a bad daughter. She just wasn't lovable. There's something terribly wrong with me. And then she wipes her eyes and she returns to her adult state and she calms down. She comments that she was getting in touch with some stuff that she knew. I mean, she obviously knew the stories, but didn't realize how it was affecting the present. He makes a similar comment. But I stopped the discussion and quickly ask, go ahead and ask her how you can help. And so he asks her how she can help. She says, you can be on time. And she gives 3 things that he can do, one of which was, in certain circumstances, we could take separate cars when you're not positive you're going to be there for me. And they opted to start with that one, as I recall. Let's Wednesday night at church take separate cars. Sometimes I'm hung up at work. And they were fine with that. So I just take them through this exercise. And so in 4 sessions, you can cover this. In a 5th session, you can reciprocate and go the other way. And most of you will do more than 4 sessions. You'll see my 4-session marriage counseling is actually a precursor. Like we take couples who have had adultery into an intensive. We do 4-session marriage counseling, and then we coach for a year because adultery has its own big mess to deal with, which we don't have time to deal with here. But there's a year of actual intervention and coaching and training and therapy following adultery. Always it takes that long to work through all the triggers, the memories, the relapse potential, and so forth. Okay, so that's a quick outline of the 4-session therapy that we do in intensives, and I will do with a highly functioning couple that just wants to enhance their relationship. 4 sessions is all it takes, and they're golden. So, but this is required for change. I have to want to change me, not you. I have to want to change me. And sometimes you can't do the 4 sessions until you get, it's just going to take longer because you have to get them to get, I don't change you, I change me. I'm responsible for me. And so, as I mentioned, I use Pro-D for a real good look. And I was giving free assessments at this talk. I need to edit these slides. Next time I do this, I can see that. So I see in my slideshow that I'm going through the sessions one at a time, which I've already done. So this will be a quick recap. Session 2, brainstorm, no discussion, vote, implement, with all the homework from session 1. And we don't have time to role play today. And I've talked about session 4, where we do search for safety. Here is the acronym. It's in the slides. By the way, I'm recording this. This will be available on YouTube. You can watch this presentation, or you can dive deeper into the 4th session on YouTube as well. But there's my acronym. Safe place, emotions are expressed. There's affect change. There's reframing. There's comfort. And there's help. And then the slide we'll go through talking about each one. I didn't review these slides, obviously, before doing this today. Otherwise, I'd have known they were coming. But here are each of the slides describing each step. And the process usually flows in 5-minute increments unless it gets stuck. And it rarely does, honestly. Sometimes I have to coach the listener in empathic response. I am active there. If the listener starts asking questions, starts getting emotionally reactive, I just say, just respond with empathy. What is he or she feeling? And it gets them right back on track. So you may learn something historical if it has a deep level to it. There's your reframe. And then you provide comfort and help. 3 things. I write them down. I have the listener choose one thing. And if they do more, it's a bonus, okay? So here's another case. 57-year-old Navy captain, leader of men and women, powerful presence, angry with his wife for procrastinating over a medical issue that I didn't even know what it was when we started. And so I took them through this, and he told the story, very dramatic story, as she's listening, about his father who was alcoholic and how every night he would extinguish his cigarettes. And one night he did it. And at 11 years of age, his father burned to death in his bed. The house burned down. And he began with body-racking sobs, proclaiming, "It's my fault. I'm a bad son." So he's carrying this guilt and burden all of his life. She provides comfort. He calms down, looks at me and says, "Man, I didn't know that was in there." Now, he knew the story. He didn't know that was part of the now. And very often when I'm doing these sessions, I don't do a lot of processing with them. I don't review the story. If it looks like they get it, we just let the moment be. And that's what we did here. She says to him, I said, "Now ask how you can help." And he says, get your eye fixed. I said, "Great. What's the second one?" And I don't remember what that one was, but it was related to that. And then he pauses. I can't think of a third one. Then he got real soft. He looks her in the eyes and says, "Let's you and me do something really special this weekend," which would seem unrelated to her getting her eye fixed, but in terms of relationship preservation, a big deal. She declared, "I'm doing all of them." And I said, no, I just want one. You choose one. If you do the rest, it's a bonus. She says, "Well, I'll make an appointment tomorrow to go have the optometrist look at my eye." So, I mean, you all get it, right? You can see the story. He was totally responsible for the life and death of his father. He's totally responsible for everybody in his world. He cannot tolerate somebody not doing what he thinks they must do, right? I didn't process that with them. I just let them live their life. And they moved forward beautifully and did great with that. So that's another dramatic story. So just to share, an older couple compared to the younger couple I shared earlier. So how do you practice this? You teach them to do safety days. Now, here's the thing. This is a true statement. 100% of my couples that do safety days change. To some degree, they benefit. I can only get 30% to do it. Motivation, commitment, they drop out of therapy, life happens, something goes on. But those that do it, I guarantee they will improve. Always, always, always. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the husband is the listener. He gets up in the morning and he prepares himself to listen with empathy to the wife. He cannot complain or criticize her on these days. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, those are her days. Sunday, they just have to figure out. There's an odd number of days in the week. So listeners only listen with empathy. This is where they practice empathy. I encourage them to practice echoing, which is repeating the facts daily, all the time. Please pass the salt. Oh, you'd like the salt. Where would you like to go for dinner? You'd like to know where I'd like to go for dinner. Do it so it's comical even to your children are saying, "What's wrong with you people?" But that teaches people how to echo. And the safety days prepares them to empathize, keeps it in the forefront. So Becky and I, my wife and I, did this in 1989 for 90 days. I woke up on Monday morning thanking God for the day, thinking through what's my role. I'm a listener. I can do this. We had a traditional home back then, little children. Becky's at home. I drive home. I remind myself it's Monday. I have no idea whether I'm walking into heaven or hell on the domestic scene. I'll be ready to be the empathic listener. So the next day, and I would say to myself, if I have a frustration, I take it up tomorrow, which I rarely did. I mean, I often didn't need to carry over to the next day. But I use some transparency to illustrate. But people are different. I tend to be very goal-focused, and so it was not hard for me to compartmentalize my days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. My wife is much more spontaneously expressive. It was harder for her. So sometimes on a Tuesday, she'd come to me with a complaint, and I would say, "Sorry, it's not your day." Gently, I would say that, and she would but she'd pull it under control. And we found phenomenal improvement in our relationship, the reduction of anxieties, reduction of miscommunication, reduction of conflicts. And so it's easy for me to authentically declare that this is powerful stuff, which is a lesson for all of you married therapists. If you don't practice this stuff, you can't teach it. It just looks like you're reading something out of a book. You can only lead couples with some kind of authentic experience. If you're single, you're leading from your depth of experience as a marriage therapist. If you're married, it's mingled in with that, your personal life experience and your training and your experience. And so when I'm teaching this to students, I tell them, don't try to fake it. Just say, my supervisor has lived this for 40 years, or not quite, almost 30 years, and this stuff works. So always tell the truth. Don't declare something that's false about you. It just doesn't fly. Always tell the truth. So that is that. So abuse. As I've mentioned, if people cannot, and I've worked with abusive couples, and I've had to, most of the time, recommend separation, just because the abuser is unmotivated. Personality disorders define, they perceive, they conceptualize differently than other people. And so, personality disorder is defined as chronic, ongoing, maladaptive thought processes and behaviors. So, but I'm working with a couple now, and they're making really great headway. They are deeply connected to other people. That's the key. They are successful business owners, and they're in a little church, which is good to be in a little church because you can't just hide there. They're in a little church that's developing. They have friends who are great role models, also entrepreneurs. So their peer group has some rich people in it, and they're making progress. So we were able to eliminate aggression from the repertoire a number of months ago. And it could return, though. That's the thing. You always have to be on guard. There's a scripture that says, you get rid of one demon, and unless you sweep the house clean, 7 more come to take his place. Metaphorically, that's true with bad behavior. It just comes back in spades unless we just really work to develop habits that are powerful and use interventions on a regular basis. So that is my training for today. I appreciate those of you that came in. Thank you. We have 4 online at the moment, and if you are interested in engaging us, those of you that may view this online, don't use the phone number there. That was simply used for the workshop, but rather use our phone at 757-466-3336 is our clinic number. The website is edencounseling.com. And the you can also use the Facebook. So I thank you for your kind time and attention, those of you that work at Eden Counseling. Oh, I wanted to just leave this up here again. If you want a text that covers what we cover, it isn't written specifically for couples. It's cheap, $5.98. You get the Kindle for free. It's a bargain. You can read it in 44 minutes. Says Amazon.com. I published it through CreateSpace. So have a great day. Those of you that are snowed in, enjoy your time off. Those of you that are coming to work, be careful. Bye-bye.